So this is part B of the Kudila television channel being broadcast only on the internet from London just around midnight. It's part B of the Kudila television channel being broadcast on Wednesday, 30th of June 2021. And the piece in the Financial Times of Wednesday, 30th of June 2021, is the day before the Batley and Spen by-election. And they're saying the Brexit legacy embeds tribal divisions among voters. Now, as we said, the Financial Times is another lying outlet in Fleet Street. Despite the price, which is about 6-7 times the price of this scum and the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror average, it has the same narrative and the same darkness and the same stupidity as the rest of Fleet Street. So this piece about Brexit legacy embeds tribal divisions among voters. Byline to George Parker, the political editor. is again a peace in denial. It's a dishonest peace, it's an ignorant peace, and it's ignorant because it doesn't contain the evidence of the British economy, British society being absolutely dependent on the rest of the world, which is why Brexit was wrong and will remain wrong. Because the rest of the world will have daily impact with increasing pressure on the individuals in British society, economically, socially, and otherwise, in terms of the need for international cooperation and recognition of the realities of the likes of the COVID and the implications in terms of travel, in terms of business. Brexit is going to do damage, increasing damage to society. And this quotation from Nigel Farage, Nigel Farage starts the piece and Nigel Farage ends the piece by the stupid George Parker. Farage adds in the concluding paragraph in that piece, for people who voted Brexit, it is part of their identity. Well, that doesn't say anything. Because if the identity is tested in the shop, in the jobs, in the housing, then it won't bring any result that is of benefit to the voter. Identity is a meaningless thing. It has to be measured by life experience, empirical evidence of empirical encounters and contacts. So the financial crimes is containing the stupidity. As we said in part A, the piece about Israel and Palestine is shallow. It's written by Ban Ki-moon, who was a Secretary General of the United Nations. And Ban Ki-moon has completely failed to explain the United Nations failures. Which is a piece by a former Secretary General of the United Nations, is a disastrous omission because it should have been talking about the United Nations role. And it should have been talking about the various approaches that the United Nations has made in the last 75 years. And the violations of the United Nations requirements and obligations and the treaties and agreements, the violations by the United States, by the United Kingdom, by France, of the rights of the Palestinians is something that has to be clearly focused on instead of the rambling, stupid series of in denial pieces that the Ban Ki-moon piece in the financial crimes is made of. And this piece by this Martin Wolf about inequality is classic, stupid, in denial piece by the Financial Crimes. Financial Crimes is in denial of the whole world, of the many, the lives of the many. It's a fantasy piece. Identity is also mentioned in support of the Iranian status quo in the piece, the FTB greed. Now, note the difference between the identity of the Brexiteers and the identity of the Iranians. Now, the financial piece, the big greed, ends with 1, 2, 3 paragraphs given to this campaigner called Dilaram. And he says in the beginning of the third paragraph, Dilaram demonstrated with fellow students in December 2019 as mass protests erupted against a rise in fuel prices. But it was an unhappy experience. Fellow students were arrested, and Dilaram witnessed the might of the system they were up against. It showed we can't make a difference. Whatever we do, they are more powerful than us. There is nobody who supports us when we protest, says Dilaram, whose father took part in the 1979 revolution, but now regrets it. Our problem is not religion, adds Dilaram. The problem is we don't want an Islamic state. People should choose how they live. Now, this is absolutely, classic copy of what is happening in the UK or in the rest of the Western kind of countries, powerful countries. Those who are victims, those who are deprived of the rights in these countries could say the same thing as Dilaram, as quoted, is saying about Iran. The problem is we don't want an Islamic state. The problem is we don't want a corrupt state, a corrupt racist state. People should choose how they live, of course. But how do you bring an end to the corrupt racist state? They are more powerful than us. And what's going to happen to the Labour Party, if you like, is going to make no real difference. Because the Labour Party has never been, as I said in part A, fit for purpose. How do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? The unfitness for purpose relates to the needs of the many, the individual people like the one being quoted in Iran, in the context of Iran. People should be allowed or be able to, or free to live their life, choose the way they live their lives. What is Dilaram quoted as? The problem is we don't want an Islamic state. People should choose how they live. Of course, people should choose how they live. That's the 1,000-year-old problem that has been faced, and it has not been solved. It has not been solved by the Christians dominating the countries in the imperial occupied states across the subcontinent. The Christians who have dominated the Muslims and the Hindus and the Sikhs of the subcontinent, and the Christians have not solved the problem across Africa and the rest of Asia, where people have had their religions, but not as dominant as the Christian one, not as kind of centralized as the Christians. The alternatives in the subcontinent, for example, in the case of India, in the case of Pakistan, and in Bangladesh, the two main religions, Hindus and Islam, have not provided anything like a mentionable structure based on ethics and values that are directly related to the source, the religion of Hinduism or religion of Islam. And although in the context of the post-British Raj subcontinent, questions do arise about what the majority of the people in the subcontinent were promised, were entitled to. But they have not been given the benefit of the promised goods, the promised standards of life, promised standards of society. And as we have been extensively discussing India, and as we have been extensively making the point that Indira Nehru and her years in power have been responsible for the appearance of the Hindu fundamentalists, because Indira Nehru totally failed to deliver democracy, democratic accountability, and the bogus slogan, Garibi Hatao, eradicate, remove starvation, poverty. What we are saying here, end hunger at root. This is not something that we have started now. This program, this objective, this solution existed in our campaign, in our movement, decades before Indira Gandhi took over India as the fronter of the cabal of crooks. Indira Nehru abused the name of Gandhi as a clear propaganda thing, and her endorsers and colluders and promoters in the West brazenly, stupidly, criminally, irresponsibly, and dishonestly allowed her to peddle herself as Indira Gandhi, whereas her real name remained Indira Nehru. There is a million years difference between the actual impact of the two names. Gandhi, whatever his shortcomings, was not associated with power and was not associated with corruption of the scale that Indira Nehru and the Nehru family epitomized and was embodied and was embodiment of. And the Indian National Congress that existed as a platform, although the various people left the original Indian National Congress and challenged it ideologically, intellectually. But in terms of political mobilization, they couldn't challenge, because the impact and the weight needed for a mobilization, galvanization of the opposition to the Nehru family's control of the Indian National Congress simply did not exist, simply did not prevail on the part of the ones who were aware of the need for change and replacement. The kind of dedication that Mamata Banerjee has brought to her Trinamool Congress in West Bengal, that is not present in other parts of India, in other states. And the personality of Mamata Banerjee says a lot about the reason why she has prevailed. It's not the kind of personality that is available or is observed in any other politician in any other states in the Republic of India. So what's the difference between India and Iran? And what's the difference between those two and the Brexit identified Britain? And the difference is really less important than the similarity, because the kind of media that is needed in a society like the UK, the Little England, the media doesn't exist. And the reason why the media doesn't exist is because the informed and enlightened personalities who could drive the political agenda and thus force the media to acknowledge the driven political agenda concerned is absent. There is no such political mover and driver present among the people in the United Kingdom, or what remains of the United Kingdom. So what that means is that the status quo of the media, the actual tools, the connections, and the means of the propaganda and the information on which the gullibles depend is in the hands of the crooks. They are not members of the ordinary people, not ordinary personalities, ordinary voters. The main Fleet Street ownership is, of course, in the hands of the crooks. The crooks that have got access to and control of massive resources that are not available to the many. And historically, the Labour Party, which should have been the party of democratic government in this country, for most of the last 70 years, the Labour Party is not made up of members with the intelligence, the morality, the ethics, and most certainly are not backed by big money that controls the Financial Times, for example, and the agenda of the Financial Times, the agenda of the Daily Star, where Cock's Cocksure, this column by Don Nielsen. Don Nielsen is a racist woman born and brought up in Newham, but now she has moved on. Don Nielsen is being quite openly pornographic in her description. The description is she is not the first observer of the connection between Matthew Hancock's name and his behavior to do with his sexual abuse, etc. So she's heading, or the piece that she has written about Hancock is headed, Coco was blowing his own trumpet. Now that's a very brazen kind of way of referring to various sexual activities. And the whole piece is full of that kind of reference. What she is doing, she is of course appealing to the gullibles who are the majority of among the readers or subscribers or patrons of this paper, so-called. They are kind of lowest common denominator to do with sex, sexual abuse, and sexual perversion, sexual perpetration, indulgence in sex, and brazen sexualities. Now that is the opposite of what should happen in terms of making ordinary people aware of the lack of morality, lack of ethics, and lack of accountability, lack of decency on the part of people who are in control of the government, like, for example, in the current context, Matthew Hancock has been and is. And then she also extends the use of this loose sexual acts based kind of references to the behavior of Boris Johnson. And it's not a very difficult thing to do for anyone. Anyone with a basic kind of intelligence can do that. Because in terms of numbers of adulterous sexual misconduct and treachery by Boris Johnson as compared to Matthew Hancock, Boris Johnson has perpetrated more sexual wrongs and adulterous misconduct than Matthew Hancock has done. But Don Newsom is not the only one to be caught being taken in by the propaganda image via the Sky News and others of Trevor Terrible Phillips. Because Trevor Terrible Phillips made a reference or made references to the fact that his daughter, who died in her 30s, was not given the presence and attendance of family and relations because of the rules banning mixing. That is a perfectly understandable reference. But where Dan Niels Neeson many times exposed anti-Muslim racist gets her facts wrong is in describing this Trevor Terrible Phillips, an anti-Muslim mental slave of the worst kind, as a mild-mannered TV presenter. He's not mild-mannered when it comes to denouncing and demonizing Muslims. He never has been. His main stock in trade has been his antipathy and hatred against Muslims. And this criminal perpetrated his anti-Muslim contract to his slavery masters and slavery mistresses by even claiming that he was married to a Muslim woman for nearly 30 years. Now, this Trevor Terrible Phillips is not only an abuser like George Galloway, who was exposed when he ditched his white wife and embarked on a series of marriages with Muslim women, all of whom he later denounced, but all of whose identities he abused for his career as a parasite, posing as a Muslim friend. So we shall talk about Galloway again under this heading, posing as a Muslim friend. There exists no evidence going over the last, let's say, 300 years. No evidence that can be accessible or found of any member of the population of the world, either from the Asian subcontinent of what is now Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, or from any part of Africa, where a person who is not of Anglo-Saxon origin has been recognized in their own rights. When it comes to philosophy, when it comes to social thinking, when it comes to political thinking, when it comes to the overall qualities of intellect, there is no record. And as I've said in the past, the so-called Palestinian academic who was given an academic spot in a USA setting, Edward Said, who wrote the book The Orientalists. Edward Said was not a Palestinian. When the anti-Palestinian racists in the USA made the decision to recruit him and give him the platforms, they did that so that they could say that he was a Palestinian. But that was a doubly poisonous lie. Edward Said was not a Palestinian Muslim, which is the absolute majority of the Palestinians. Edward Said was a Christian. But it was true also that he was a Palestinian. So they left out the Christian bit and they misappropriated the whole identity of the Palestinians. And they deployed him as a counter to the allegation that they were racists and they were anti-Palestinians. In everything else they did, those so-called academic platform owners or controllers, in the context of the rights of the Palestinians, everything they did went against the needs and the rights and the entitlements and the humanity of the Palestinians. Just like Wednesday's Fleet Street papers running stories about the so-called defeat of the German by the English team. The main decisive, inspiring, leading goal was actually achieved by the black man, African origin man, Raheem Sterling. There is no evidence that Fleet Street papers have even heard of Raheem Sterling, let alone have recognized him. So this is the reality of the identity. What on earth is the Financial Times, which we have renamed Financial Crimes, is doing, starting a whole piece by quoting Nigel nasty racist Farage and ending the piece by quoting the racist, lying, nasty Nigel Farage, talking about the people who voted for Brexit have a identity about it. What on earth? Because if they have the identity, then Raheem Sterling should not exist. And nor should that goal have been scored. Think about that. This is artificial, false. The identity of the Iranians is false because what they're doing, the Iranian regime, let's say for example, the period from 1979, when the takeover, the occupation of the American embassy took place. So 79 to 89, 99, 2009, 2019, that is 22 years now, 42 years now. In the 42 years, the Iranians have not established any framework of ethics, morality, let alone established any place in the narrative, in the international context of Islam and Muslims. They have not established that identity, they have not established, and they have not, therefore, dealt with the demands against their corrupt history that appear from the people who want to live their lives, as the person quoted at the end of that piece in the Financial Crimes says. The pressure, the tension against everything Iranian, that is based on the control and the behavior of the series of regimes, or the behavior of the people who have made the decisions in the name of the Iranian regimes. Because what the Muslims in the world are faced with, in the world meaning in the Western world, the Muslims are faced with the completely kind of odd an absurd challenge that are really aimed at Iran, but have nothing to do with the Muslims. Because most Muslims in the West do not belong to the part of Islam that the Iranians kind of control. It doesn't mean that the Muslims belong to something else. They don't. But they most certainly don't have any loyalty politically or socially or in terms of the narrative to the Iranian regime that has been in place, or the series of regimes that have been in place since 1979. And as has been happening in the case of Bangladesh, the very people who are responsible, for the robbery of the democracy and the democratic rights, who have been responsible since 1971, let's say, for the absence of democracy in Bangladesh, are the people that promised democracy to the people during the decade of the street campaign in East Pakistan. They said that once, well, it wasn't a pronounced word, but it was in effect the reason for the campaign. They said that once we are out of the partnership with the Punjabis, that is the West Pakistanis, we will have democracy, we will have freedom, and we will have our identity. Remember where we are going. Identity of Nigel Farage and Brexit. Identity of the Iranians and their Islamic State claimed identity. And the identity of those who said that Bengali nationalism would deliver or equal identity, liberty, freedom, security, equality, and all the good qualities of the universal platform. But looking at the demonstrations now taking place in Dhaka mainly, and the demonstrations are about 3 or 4 or 5 different layers or dimensions. Put together all the demonstrations that are against the current cabal in power in Bangladesh. The demonstrators are absolutely clear that the current cabal in government is failing, betraying, letting down, including the main narrative that is concerned about the murders of the Bangladeshi soldiers in the Pilkhana and related kind of concentrations. They are saying that India is already controlling Bangladesh. And they are blaming the Indian spying network, research and analysis wing, also known as RAW, R-A-W. RAW is the title of at least one India South film, blockbuster. And the praising of RAW is among the themes promoted by many of the blockbusters in India. Telugu, Tamil, Hindi, Bengali, Kannada, to mention some of the languages in which these films have been made, glorifying research and analysis wing and demonizing the counterpart in real life that exists in Pakistan called the ISI, the Inter Services Agency, ISA or ISI. The ISA or the ISI and the RAW are the most powerful publicly known outlets that are associated with the regimes and the states of India and Pakistan in their own separation. The identity of Indian, independent India, is equal by the presentation of whatever the research and analysis wing does. And the same happens in the narrative coming from Pakistan, that the ISI, the Inter-Services Agency, is the most patriotic agency of the country and therefore is equal to the identity of Pakistan. But an account of the lives of the ordinary people at the hands of the state that RAW supposedly protects shows that most of the Indians, hundreds of millions of Indians, are let down, betrayed, violated, with hundreds of thousands of them being killed or massacred in the name of the identity of India. Same happens in Pakistan. In the name of Pakistan, any number of people are killed, murdered, imprisoned, tortured, violated in the name of the identity of Pakistan. Same happening in Bangladesh. Not only did it happen with the murders of the 57 BDR soldiers in the Pilkhana, it happened with them. It has been happening with the murders of others whose names, identities, and details are not disclosed or publicly known. So these three countries, all these three countries, the three states, let's say the central states, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, the states have been busy, or the states have been allowed to be busy in carrying out mass murders of Pakistanis, Indians, and Bangladeshis. And they have got in common the issue of patriotism, assertion of the identity. So these countries are next door to Pakistan is, of course, Iran, and it has got the identity. And here in the UK are the Brexiteers, the racists, the patriots, who have got the Brexiteering identity, the racist identity, the new Little English identity. So when each of the identity groups is examined on the evidence of the behavior of their kind of promoters, it becomes very clear that people like Don Newsom are unfit for purpose. That is to say, as commentators, they are not fit to be consulted, let alone to be taken as sources of authentic opinion or description or analysis. Now she says that she appears on Channel 5's Jeremy Vine show, ITV's This Morning, and on Talk Radio. So she has got three platforms there, as well as this column in the Daily Scar. What does she contribute? What does she produce? We are asking the questions. No platform, no other channel, no other program is doing that. We are asking this question. And we are saying that we are conducting world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. When I say world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, the presumption is that Fleet Street is sick. And by Fleet Street being sick, we assert, strictly on the evidence of its behavior, that it is a platform or a series of newspapers chewing out, printing lies and untruths and denials about the country and about the rest of the world. And they are hiding the truth about the misconduct of the British government, so-called. When we say so-called, we mean that there is no real legitimacy in the actual description to which the so-called is attached as a qualifier, as a condition. Now, Don Newsom says that, let's see what she actually is saying in today's piece about Boris Johnson. The crooked reptilian affected phony should have been sacked immediately by his boss. But as the boss in question is a founding member of the crooked reptilian affected phony club, that is crap, it would have looked hypocritical beyond belief. So instead we had Boris Johnson insisting the matter was closed, unlike the mistress's legs. I mean, she leaves nothing to the imagination. And we should all, I mean, this is really absolutely despicable profanity. She says, Don Newsom, so instead we had Boris Johnson insisting the matter was closed, unlike the mistress's legs, and we should all swallow hard. That's her words. Thankfully, we got to the bottom of it when the wave of revulsion overwhelmed Coco, and he resigned. And she goes on into very, very profane descriptions. So the whole piece by Don Neeson is full of profanities. Now, this may entertain some of our readers, but we most certainly don't believe that she should be thinking that she has achieved something by this profanity, which, in the case of a man with a name like Hancock, is the easiest of things to do in the context of the issues that she is referring to. But the question arises from Don Neeson writing the profane piece. Has she ever taken a universally moral stance against anything else that Boris Johnson has done? The answer is no. In fact, Don Neeson is on the record as supporting Boris Johnson when Boris Johnson has made a racist statement, hateful statement. So, for example, in her column, dated the 20th of November, she wrote in the headline, 24th of November, it was updated on the twice, 22nd, 59, 22:59 GMT, let's say on the 24th of November 2020. So Don Neeson wrote, or the piece that appeared in her name was headed, ISIS bride Shamima Begum knew what she was doing. She chose a death cult. And she wrote that in responding to the television program on ITV GM Good Morning Britain. And it was a long piece, and it said, the heading was on the issue of 8:40 GMT in the morning, should Shamima Begum return? And the subheading was, her team claims she is our problem and should be allowed to face justice here. She is not my problem. That is Don Neeson saying. She chose to join a death cult and turn her back on a safe, comfortable democratic country, says Don Neeson. Well, for a start, this is not a safe, comfortable democratic country for millions of people, not just one. Millions of people, and there is no access to what democratic services Neeson said there. So we are not going to contrast the reality faced by the 14 to 20 million people in this country about the absence of and denial of access to justice or remedies through the court system, to the protection by the local councils, to the protection by the social services, the protection by society in terms of being allowed to have the basic human rights as contained in and proclaimed in the thousands of declarations and agreements and treaties to which the United Kingdom remains actively signatory to, or is an active signatory. What Don Nizam is saying is not original, and is not truthful, and is not responsible, and is not enlightened, is not compassionate, and is not based on any recognition on her part of the universal declarations of human rights and all the qualities that are entailed and enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For example, every day on the internet, the United Nations agencies post, both carrying the Facebook and also YouTube and Twitter accounts, the United Nations agencies refer to slogans. They should be referring to articles and treaties, but they don't do that more often than that often that they should be doing. What they do is to pander to various sloganeering kind of tendencies and propensities, and they publish slogans like everyone has a right to a house, a home, shelter, peace, freedom from torture and hunger, that kind of thing. But if those were related to the actual treaties that the countries like the United Kingdom are signed up to, and if an audit were made of the compliance or the level of compliance by the likes of the United Kingdom, a signatory country, the likes of India, likes of Bangladesh, likes of Pakistan as signatory countries, in upholding those rights and applying those rights to their citizens or the people in their countries, then it would become very clear and it would be practically useful for the deprived of those rights, if an audit were made of all these qualities and entitlements in, let's say, these 4 countries, and a number was put against each of the obligations being broken by these countries, then it could be seen to what extent the rights of the individuals are being violated. Don Nizam says that the decision by Shamima Begum was made voluntarily. Shamima Begum didn't make the voluntary decision, because the headline says there, the subheading, that she, that is Shamima Begum, chose to turn her back on a country that was safe. I'm looking for that piece because it has disappeared, as happens with the internet pages. So Don Nizam, in her piece dated the 24th of November 2020. The heading says, ISIS bride Shamima Begum knew what she was doing. She chose a death cult. And then the subheading underneath that reads, Shamima Begum's team claims she is our problem and should be allowed to face justice here. Now, Don Newsom says she is not my problem. She chose to join a death cult and turn her back on a safe, comfortable democratic country, says Don Newsom. And there are faces appearing on the screen. That being in November 2020, Piers Morgan was there on the program. And Don Newsom unfavorably contrasts Shamima Begum with Greta Thunberg in terms of age, now the danger and the stupidity of Don Newsom unfavorably comparing Shamima Begum with Greta Thunberg is, first of all, that without the contrast with the supposed image of Shamima Begum, Don Newsom would not be hailing Greta Thunberg in the way that she does in that column, dated the 24th of November 2020. Because Greta Thunberg is not being praised by Fleet Street. Greta Thunberg is being denied the recognition that she does deserve because of the very necessary, urgent campaign that she has been part of initiating. So it's a dangerous, dishonest comparison. In any case, nobody can expect any other girl aged the same number of years as Greta Thunberg to be doing what Don Newsom is praising Greta Thunberg as having done in this piece, which she's using Greta Thunberg against Shamima Begum. That cannot happen. And the reason why that cannot happen is that millions, hundreds of millions of children, age 16 or thereabouts, are brainwashed, indoctrinated, and discouraged from taking independent action and thinking independently because of the indoctrination going on in their homes, in their societies, in their schools, etc., etc. So Shamima Begum is being accused and convicted by Don Newsom of having not been another Greta Thunberg. The point is that any ethical, moral action program, such as the one that Greta Thunberg has been identified with, is discouraged even by the families, the neighborhoods, the friends. And there is nothing in the records of Don Newsom where she has actually initiated or led any campaign that can be compared with the one that Greta Thunberg has done. For example, take the magnitude. If Greta Thunberg's campaign affects the environment, the future of the environment, the magnitude, the weight, the effect, the impact, then it can be compared with the ending of the nuclear war or putting an end to the nuclear arsenal. Would Greta Thunberg have wanted that kind of campaign? Had she wanted to do that kind of campaign, she would not have been even allowed a mention. She would have been called crazy, which she has been even in the context of the climate emergency. But if Shamima Begum were to start a campaign calling for an end to the nuclear war, would Don Newsom support her? Most certainly not. In the context of the references surrounding Shamima Begum, Don Newsom would have probably said that, look, Shamima Begum is being an agent of the Islamic State revolutionaries against the world. They want to denuclearize the war so that they can take over the world. Denuclearize the world, especially the Western world, so that they can take over the world. That's what she would say. So Don Newsom is intellectually being totally dishonest and racist. The other thing that we have said, and we have been saying, and let's refer to Shamima Begum being a child, which is what Don Newsom, in her column on the 24th of November 2020, called her. If Shamima Begum is a child and is to be treated as a child, would Don Newsom support her rights as a child? Because a child is exempt from a lot of prosecutions and crimes because the child is presumed to be incapable of forming criminal intent in the understandable sense of criminal law as it is understood. So if Shamima Begum is to be treated as a child, and that treatment obviously including the presumed vulnerability on the part of that child to the likes of tactics and brainwashing and radicalization and grooming that must have been involved in their whole program being implemented, would Don Newsom at least extend the possibility of the presumption that all those things happened and that Shamima Begum was a victim of series of brainwashing and grooming and so on? Because we have said that the Tower Hamlets Council, the local council being responsible for taking action under the duty called safeguarding children duties. If the Tower Hamlets Council did take those steps, whatever the steps might have been, eventually meaning that a child like Shamima Begum would have been spared being involved in all the things that she did get involved in because she was not extended, she was not given the support by the local Tower Hamlets Council. What would Don Newsom say? Would she still maintain that Shamima Begum was a born bad person and that she would defy all attempts, all rational, reasonable, timely efforts to help her stay clear of the involvements? That is one of the questions. Not only to Don Newsom. This is a question to all the others in her position, that is Don Newsom's position as writers, columnists, contributors in Fleet Street. Which one of them has come to discussing any of this or come anywhere near discussing any of this? Which ones has condemned the Tower Hamlets Council for failing to carry out the safeguarding the children duties that they owed to Shamima Begum? There is no record of any Fleet Street writer doing that. One who has mentioned Shamima Begum, and we have given him the credit for mentioning Shamima Begum, is a columnist, the spy writer, who has got a column on the Daily Beaverbrook. He has actually said the opposite of what Don Neeson has said. Because unlike Don Neeson, that writer who has had his opinion about Shamima Begum published in the Daily Express group, by the Daily Express group, has actually looked at the facts and the evidence, and he has not found any facts or the evidence that support the deprivation of the basic rights of citizenship that has been perpetrated against Shamima Begum by Sabit Jabid, when Jabid was the incumbent in the post of the Home Office under Theresa May. So what I'm saying is that the Tower Hamlets Council played the crucial, negligent role in allowing the atmosphere to prevail whereby Shamima Begum was avoidably exposed to exploitation, brainwashing, grooming, indoctrination. And the result is obviously known to the whole world. Would Don Neeson acknowledge the duties owed by the Tower Hamlets Council? Well, there is nothing that she has actually written or posted that suggests that she has recognized the duties owed by Tower Hamlets Council. We shall be talking more about these issues and the issues of the local councils, Karkleys Council, as being claimed by George Galloway in the Part A of the date Thursday, the 1st of July 2021, which we are already into now.